another episode of the Square and Compass podcast. This time we are down south in North Carolina with Worshipful Brother Ben Wallace. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, Cameron, I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's gotten hot down south. So I'm in the air conditioning business, so we're hopping down here. I kind of wish I was up there with you. I bet your weather's better.
Well, you say that. It is freezing today. It is very, very cold at the moment and rainy and a gross day in Windsor, Ontario. So if we could switch, I would take that. I'll head down to North Carolina because I'm told it's never been there before. And I'm told it's a beautiful place. I'd love to visit one day.
Yeah. Hey, you're always welcome here. You come, you can stay with me. We'll hang out. I'll show you around Masonry in North Carolina.
I appreciate that. Once the border opens, knock on wood, I'm definitely planning to make it down to the States, and I'd love to. North Carolina's on the list for sure. So I contacted you through checking out the MidAtlantic Esotericon website. That is coming up soon, as of this recording, June 12th, and I'm going to be leaving the link where people can purchase tickets for that event in the description to this video, because whether you are a Mason or not a Mason and just interested in esoteric and philosophical ideas, I would strongly encourage everybody watching to consider purchasing a ticket for this event. It's virtual, so you don't even need to wear pants. And if that is not a incentive, I don't know what is. But yeah, you are one of the presenters. So are you looking forward to Esotericon?
I am. Yeah, that's a great conference, and it's a great bunch of guys down there. Joe Martinez and Kevin Homan, and I'm not sure who all else has a hand in actually putting it on. The first year they had it, it was live and in person. So we went. It's in Virginia, so it was only like 5 hours for us. And we took a contingent from North Carolina, drove up, met all the guys, had a fabulous day of education. And then the next year, the COVID hit. And so last year it was all virtual. And this year they were on the bubble. They didn't know if things were going to be open back up or not. And so they had to make a decision. And so they decided to go all virtual. But again, the content of the presenters is always fabulous if you're into the esoteric side of Freemasonry. So it's not specifically Masonic. It's open to anybody that wants to buy a ticket. And there'll be presenters there that are mostly talking about Masonic stuff, but there will be some there that are talking about things that are not Masonic at all. My program is kind of it's about the sacred space and the work that we do in that sacred space. So I've tailored this program just for them, and it's partly geared towards the Freemasons, but partly towards other Western mystery traditions. So it's a mix.
Well, that brings up something that I've been struggling with this podcast, or hoping to change a little bit with this podcast, is the idea that a Masonic topic or Masonic ideas will exclusively appeal to Freemasons or people who are connected to Freemasonry. I liken it to, if you say, for example, mixed martial arts, right? A podcast on mixed martial arts, it isn't advertising solely to mixed martial artists, right? The vast majority of the audience for those podcasts are people who are fans of the sport, and they find that when you have whoever it may be, Conor McGregor, Diaz, whoever it is, discussing the sport and their history in the sport, quote unquote regular people are interested in that. And I think the same is true of some of these Masonic / esoteric conditions. Even if somebody or topics or conversations, even if somebody is not a Mason, even hopefully tuning into this episode of the podcast, there's still a lot of wisdom and knowledge and just interest in esoteric and Masonic topics. And I think there's a lot of lessons in how, the struggles of Freemasonry over the years and how Masons run a lodge and what works and what doesn't work that can be applicable to a lot of areas of somebody's life and any organization that they may be involved in.
Yeah, that's a good take on that, Cameron. Freemasonry is part of a broader congregation of Western mystery traditions. So we didn't invent the concepts that are in Masonry. They've been with us for millennia before Freemasonry ever came along in its current form. And they're practiced by different esoteric traditions. Freemasonry came along 300-400 years ago in the form that we kind of know it today, and created out of that corpus its own style of Western mystery tradition. So when you're talking to the Freemasons, you can talk about anything related to Freemasonry, know your audience. But I'll tell you a story, Cameron. I was shocked. My first Kabbalah teacher, who is a lady, obviously not a Freemason, and she was a practitioner of a Western mystery tradition, but she was running a Kabbalah course that was kind of open to anybody. I found myself in that, and when we're talking Freemasonry, we have to be careful because, the signs and the words and the grips and, there are secrets there. But we just happened into a conversation one day where she started she was telling me about Freemasonry is what she was doing. And she was saying, oh yeah, I've read a lot of books and I understand you guys have these guys, this guy that sits in the East and this guy that sits in the West, and you've got this storyline. And she laid out the entire meaning of Freemasonry. And I was just sitting there completely shocked that she understood it. I said, how do you know all that? She said, oh, Ben, it's Western Mystery 101. We all do it. It's just that's y'all's storyline. Our storyline is different, but it's the same message. So specifically with Esotericon, though, they're not Masonic. I don't want to speak for those guys, but they don't bill this thing as Masonic at all. They just happen to have a lot of Masons that they pull from because that's where they know esoteric guys and where they find those instructors. But the core lessons of Freemasonry are well known to the other traditions. And they often understand it. My experience is not only this lady that I was talking about, but in general, the other esoteric Western mystery traditions understand the meaning of the ritual much better than the Freemasons do. Freemasonry has lost that aspect of its teachings largely.
And discussing the esoteric versus exoteric, but also the ability for Masonic teachings and philosophy to connect with a wide audience, and also with Freemasons. That is a good segue into a project you're working on at the moment, right? You're working on a path to Providence, the creation of the Middle Chamber program. That is a book that you are co-authoring. And it's another example of, I had, for example, on my program, William Moore. He is not a Mason, he is a historian, but he wrote an entire thesis or a book, a study on Masonic temples in New York built between 1870 and 1930. And that's a book that certainly would be of interest to Masons, but is of interest also to anybody who likes or finds historical architecture, history, heritage, interesting. And I think the same is true of your work, right? I'm sure you would be happy to have a lot of Masons purchase it and find it, but I'm also sure, anybody who wants it could get something from it and benefit from reading it. So tell us a bit about that, kind of where you are in the process of it, and just what led you to co-author this work.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. So kind of the background of this is pretty long. So if I get too long-winded, let me know. But in order to understand the book, you kind of have to back up to something that happened in North Carolina about 6 years ago. our education committee, which I was chairing at the time, had created a lot of leadership and management type courses and stuff, but we wanted to do something in the esoteric realm, the more philosophical and spiritual side of Masonry, the real meaning of the ritual. So we created a program that we call the Middle Chamber program. And it was really cutting edge. No other Grand Lodge in the United States that I know of was doing anything remotely close to this. And what it became was a year-long study course in the 3 degrees and the allegory and symbolism of what they stood for. And because it was so cutting edge, and we were talking about spooky things like esoterics, we knew that we needed some top cover. So one of the guys in the Grand Line in North Carolina was at the time, I think, the junior Grand Warden, and his name is now Most Worshipful Brother Sean Bradshaw. He's past Grand Master now, the immediate past Grand Master. At the time, he's the junior Grand Warden. Our Grand Line has always been really proactive and open to new things if you can make them feel comfortable with it. We have a great leadership contingent here in North Carolina. And Most Worshipful Brother Bradshaw, I knew to be an esoteric guy. So, some of the grand officers are more esoteric, but most are not in most grand jurisdictions. And that's okay, because they're, we need leaders and managers of all ilks. Everybody can't be a crazy wizard guy, but I knew that Sean was. Really interested in this aspect of it. So we brought him on board to kind of be our leader. And so with his guidance and our knowledge and work, and then we kind of put together this program, and it's become this wonderful cutting edge. Everybody in the nation is looking at it. So we wanted Most Worshipful Brother Bradshaw and myself to proliferate this kind of Masonry, not to take over every other kind of Masonry. It's just an aspect that we've lost. And so there's lots of fraternal stuff and charitable stuff, and all of that has a place in Masonry. But we felt like this had a place too, and it had been largely lost. So after we had the program up and running, we wanted to pass this message off to the other Grand Lodges, the other Grand Lodge officers and education committee chairmen and members, people that we thought could maybe do their own version of this program. So we decided that we would write a book. Actually, Most Worshipful Brother Bradshaw instructed me to write a book, and I started it and finally talked him into getting involved, and it became a much better book when he did. So the target audience for our book is people that could make this happen in their own Grand Lodges. And kind of the premise is, not only should we be working on these aspects of this veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols aspect of the lodge, but that with the proliferation of podcasting and social media, Masons are getting interested in this, and they're getting that message often from sources that are not sanctioned by the Grand Lodge. So some of those sources are really good. Some of those sources are really bad. But if a Grand Lodge will create a program that teaches this stuff, then they can both have control of it, which means their Masons are not out there in the wild west of the interwebs, and they can control the message. So that's the premise of the book.
And is the plan for the book to be available for order online, or once it is released, will there be a way for a Grand Lodge or a lodge to order it, to add to their collection?
Yes, and I sure wish I knew what that was, Cameron. So we just decided this week, we sent the manuscript. It was really a complete finished manuscript. We had already done hired a copy editor. And so it was a pretty clean manuscript. We sent it to 3 publishers, and this week we decided we're going with Laudable Pursuit. Jason Marshall, and he said that he's going to, once we had a gentleman's agreement that he was going to be our publisher, he was going to go gather some information about publishing costs and how he was going to do all that. And we're going to have a meeting coming up soon. But right now, I don't have that information available, but we have forward progress. We feel good. And as soon as, you'll see a way to order the book in all the usual locations. I'm sure it's going to be on Amazon and all of the other normal places that you find that. Laudable Pursuit has a nice website. You'll be able to order it there also, I'm sure, but I'm getting my cart a little bit before my horse.
The thing about the esoteric quote unquote side, it's funny because, by definition, you wouldn't think it, but in my opinion, or maybe not esoteric's the right term, but the philosophical underpinnings of the craft, though, that's what seems to me to be the most, if you can describe it well, that's what seems to be the most applicable to people, whether they are within the craft or not in the craft. So an example that I might give is if I'm giving just practical advice to a Masonic lodge, one piece of advice I might give is, in a degree, always make sure that the deacon maintains physical contact, whether it's a hand on the shoulder or whatever it is, with the candidate. But that's a very practical piece of advice that is really only applicable to a Masonic lodge. But the philosophical underpinnings of that piece of advice, right? The importance of guidance and the importance of support and the recognition of the privilege of being able to guide an apprentice through a degree and through a test, that is something that can apply in one way or another to pretty much any organization. And I think that's the key about the esoteric or philosophical. It's one thing to talk to a lodge or anybody about what a lodge does and how it can be done better, but the philosophical reasons behind that really is something I think that almost anybody can learn from and benefit from.
Absolutely. So when we're in lodge specifically, and just as a Freemason in general, Freemasonry is touching us on multiple levels. We're working in the material, right? I mean, we've got the doors and the regalia and the words and the movements and all of the stuff that we practice so much. We're working in the mind, in the psychical and psychological aspects of our memories and our emotions and our personality typology and all of those things. And then we're working in the spiritual, and this is where we start to lose it sometimes. The concept of great meaning and of the nobility of the human soul, and that's the things that you can't just drop out there to everybody, because they won't understand it if they haven't had some training, and B, it's a little spooky sometimes. I mean, it's just it's not things that humans are comfortable talking about, meanings of depth, and so that's why those aspects are veiled and illustrated. So yes, that's a perfect. We do the same thing here in North Carolina. Keep your hand on that candidate. In a physical sense, you're just guiding him, right? And so he kind of knows where to go. It helps him know where to stand, and that we haven't forgotten him. In the psychical sense, it's giving him reassurance and making him feel better about what's going on until that last section of that last degree. And then but on a broader sense, you're really bonding with that guy. There's power in the human touch. And by keeping your hand on him, you're not just making him feel a little bit better about, okay, I'm not fixing to fall down over a stool or something. It goes beyond that. It's really bringing him into the lodge, in a profound and spiritual way. So you're working on all three levels. Yeah.
Where do you think, or do you think that there is a line, or where might the line be between, esoteric versus woo, as Joe Rogan always says in his podcast? Or do you see a danger of some brethren going too far into mysticism to the point that it's kind of divorced from it gets a bit divorced from reason, versus the other side of it, which is brethren not taking any of it into account to the point where they're losing something of the emotional, or some of the lessons are getting lost because they're kind of not considering any of it. I guess where's the appropriate place to find the line, and how do you maintain that balance of practicality, for lack of a better term, versus the mysticism side of it?
That's about three great questions there, Cameron. Let me see if I can kind of break them down here. So let me address the easy one first, which is, can you go too far? And the answer is absolutely yes. So we knew when we started putting this program together in North Carolina that we were going to be really edgy with it. We were really going to be, talk about things that Masons don't normally talk about. And Most Worshipful Brother Bradshaw gave us a mantra as instructors, and it was, stay on Masonry. Stay on Masonry, stay on Masonry, stay on Masonry. And there is a world of esoteric things that are flat out said and that are alluded to, veiled and illustrated within your ritual. So you don't have to go outside of your ritual to find deep esoteric thought processes. But this is a mistake that many people make. So in addition to the other hats that I wear and have worn, I'm the immediate past master of Sophia Lodge, which in North Carolina, which is North Carolina's first traditional observance lodge. And the traditional observance community has had a problem with lodges in addition to, wearing tuxedos and having a high dues rate and excellence in ritual, is that they also tend to kind of lean esoteric a lot, more philosophical and spiritual. Not all of them, but many of them do. And many of those have taken it too far. And we've seen individual Masons take that too far. So like at Esotericon, I'm talking about some stuff that's really out there and edgy, but it's not a Masonic function. That's an esoteric conference, not a Masonic conference. I would not have done that at Masonicon, which I was speaking at about a month ago, which was a Masonic conference. So both lodges and individuals can go too far. And when they do, what they're doing is they're getting away from Masonry. Stay on your ritual, you'll be fine. Then the second part of your question was, are we not going far enough? And here's what I think my answer to that is. Organizations evolve, for better or for worse, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. And the way that we got to this place where we don't talk about philosophical and spiritual things in Masonry anymore comes in this evolution of it, comes straight from the World War I and World War II generation that had lived through the wars. They had to make great sacrifice. They learned how to come together as men and women to get a job done. And they were used to working in groups. So as that happened, as we spiked out at just over 4 million Masons in 1957, you could see this huge influx of this generation that were joining because they wanted to be a part of something. They had been part of the war effort, and they were fraternal joiners. Not only did they join Freemasonry in droves, but the Elk and the Moose and the Rotarians and all of the other organizations really took in a lot of people. Well, when they did, those guys weren't all interested in the philosophical and spiritual aspect. They were interested in the fraternal aspect. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way that Freemasonry evolved. But what the result of that was that these fraternally minded guys all joined the lodge. And then the esoteric guys that were already in the lodge kind of got pushed to the side as we populated local lodges with officers that were fraternally minded, not esoterically minded. And then those guys, some of them became Grand Line officers. And then all of a sudden, because they weren't interested in the esoteric aspect, the more philosophical and spiritual aspects got pushed to the side because they didn't want to talk about it. So when it came up in the lodge, guys were like, nah, we're not interested in that, right? And those guys slowly got pushed out. So that's how we got away from it. But you know what's happening now, Cameron? We're nosediving on membership. We have dropped from 4 million, just over 4 million in 1957 to under 1 million. So bad that the MSA has quit and is no longer putting out membership data. The last one I saw, it was just over, it was in 2017, and we had like 1.1 million, not even quite that. And it was continuing to nosedive. So I'm sure we're below 1 million now. So as our membership gets smaller, Grand Lodges in general are struggling with how they're going to pay the bills for all this real estate and stuff. And they're worried about the money, frankly. But the side effect of this shrinking of our population is the guys that come are no longer coming for fraternal reasons. And so we're starting to see young people coming because they're interested in these more philosophical and spiritual aspects. So it's coming right back where it started from. And we, as individual Masons and Grand Lodges especially, this is the premise of the book, needs to, instead of trying to make it easier and cheaper in a failed effort to get more members money, we should embrace the fact that we're getting guys that are more interested in what Freemasonry really teaches.
This is a bit of an aside, but since you're an American brother and you brought up World War I and World War II, one area of research that I've been thinking about lately, just based on conversations and this podcast, and one question that I'm not sure if anybody has an answer to, but I kind of want to research it. I'd love to hear just your thoughts on it, is especially from the American perspective, because there were Canadian soldiers who fought in the Vietnam War, but obviously much less than in the United States, obviously. And do you have any thoughts as to why it might have been that, you saw, and I've spoken to soldiers on this podcast, you saw such increases in Masonic membership in Canada and the United States after World War I and after World War II. In fact, as an aside, I'm missing both of my legs, and the reason I'm able to be a Mason in Ontario is because before World War I, there was a rule that you had to be a quote unquote whole man to be a Mason. You had to have all 4 of your limbs. And there were so many veterans coming back after World War I that were missing limbs that the Grand Lodge changed that rule specifically for veterans coming back from the war. So anyways, my question is, any thoughts as to why you didn't see, or why Masonry didn't see the same uptick in membership after the end of the Vietnam War as you did with World War I or World War II?
Yeah, I have a couple. And first, I'm going to give you an apology, you and your listeners. I was spouting off all these U.S. numbers, and I forgot you were in Canada. I don't have any Canadian numbers, but I'm assuming
we're dropping
the same dynamic. So,
yeah.
So the short answer is I don't know, Cameron, but I have some ideas. So here's a couple of thoughts on this. One is everybody wants to rebel against their parents, right? Nobody wants to really be like their parents, it seems. And so we go through those rebellious teenage years. And so those guys that fought in Vietnam, one, they were just probably rebelling anyway. And then we saw this entire counterculture spring up that was partly a result of the anti-war movement, partly part of the social things that were going on in America, and probably partly just, anti, kind of against our, not wanting to be just like our parents. I'm not sure what mix you put those things together in. But it was a troubling time in America. The height of the Vietnam War was arguably 1968, which was a very difficult year for our country. This is the year that of the Tet Offensive, is the year that we lost Martin Luther King. We had the Chicago race riots, or the riots in Chicago at the convention. I mean, it was just a very difficult, it was a turning point in America. And all of a sudden, everybody just had zero interest in being patriotic or being a member of anything that smacked of an institution. And so they just kind of fell off. It's also an interesting dynamic. If you talk to the Vietnam veterans, there's a ton of them that get back together with their units these days. But they didn't do that for like 25 years. It's very, very common to talk to those guys and say, hey, well, I didn't talk to anybody from my unit for 25 years. And then this one dude, in the 90s decided to put together a reunion, or kind of got us all back together talking, emailing back and forth. And it's just like they wanted to forget that time in America. And I think that concept feeds into why they were not fraternal joiners, but I don't really know. You'd have to ask a sociologist.
Yeah, it's coming up more and more, or that question has been on my mind more and more, especially because of this podcast. And speaking to historians, a lot of whom talk about those great boom periods being connected to World War I and World War II, and then the fact that you didn't see that following the Vietnam War, which in the States, certainly I would suggest was just from a logistical and the number of Americans involved in it and the length of it, it was certainly a very significant so it's interesting I'd be very interested to talk to a sociologist about why they think that may be. But that's one of the topics that has been on my mind as of late. So when you brought up World War I and World War II, I figured I'd have to bring that up, see about any of your thoughts on it. As we are recording this before Esotericon, and I plan to post this before Esotericon, and there is a link in the description to get tickets for Esotericon. Talk to us for a little bit about what you will be presenting on at Esotericon, the impetus, why you decide to present on this topic, and what it's about, and what Masons and non-Masons will be able to derive from your discussion.
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity to do that, Cameron. I created this program specifically for those guys, because it's a problem that I see all the time. So the premise of the program is that when we're in lodge, and I use this term lodge both for the Masonic lodges and the other. Again, I'm not talking just the Masons here, but I'm going to use the kind of the generic term of lodge, because your listeners are all Freemasons and they'll know the term. When we go into lodge, you're really in sort of a mystical way, you're kind of going into yourself, right? So you go in there and you make a sacred space. Now, a sacred space can be a lot of things, right? Ryan Flynn, one of my buddies, this Masonic artist, showed a picture of his sacred space, and it's where he does his paintings. Your house of worship could be a sacred space. A little grove of trees in your, behind your house could be your sacred space. It doesn't have to be all spooky. It's just a place that you go to feel close to yourself at a deep level and to divinity. It could be. I've even got a slide in the program I do of like a Thanksgiving meal at obviously what's like your grandmother's house, right? So these could all be sacred spaces. that sort of exist for every human. Every human has these places that are sacred to them. But in Lodge, we can go there and specifically make a space that's carved out in time and in space. And we do that through the opening ritual. So, there's, when we get ready to, we close the door, we have, the ritual say, everybody says their words, and there's knocks, and there's, all the stuff that's going on. But the result of that is we're making a space where we can be together with our brothers, and that we can all be like-minded, and we can open our minds and hearts to learn and share with our brothers. So that's the space. And then there's the humans. So the humans, the Masons that populate this space, that are there on some random Wednesday night, have to do their part. So the ritual does the creating of the space for us. We just have to do it well. It's better if you do it well, but even if you do it poorly, then you're still making the sacred space, because it's been done for eons before, and it kind of exists in the ether, so to speak. The humans come in, though, and they have to do their part. And for their part, they need to open themselves to the fact that this isn't their own show. They need to do their ritual well. They need to understand that what they're doing in their speaking parts, and if they're just sitting on the sidelines, just being there, is communing with their fellow Masons. And so they're hopefully giving good attention to their opening and the work that they're going to do. And if they're doing ritual work, they're loving up their candidate. They're thinking good things about him. And so they're becoming like-minded, all pulling in one direction, right? So that's kind of what the humans are supposed to do. And then the third evolution of putting this all together is that we ask, in some form, divinity to be with us, right? So for the Freemasons, there's an invocation, just like we have it. I'm a Methodist, just like we have at church, right? We have an invocation. It's the opening prayer, so to speak, where we're asking deity to come be present with us. That's what the opening prayer is, to illuminate our minds that we may walk in the light of thy countenance, right? So if divinity's coming to be with us in this space that we have made for divinity, and we're all kind of like-minded, the meeting of this third leg is that the humans that are kind of getting like-minded then have to lay their own personal ego and their little s self, their I thinking, it's all about me thinking aside. And those things meet in the center at the altar. And so you sacrifice over your ego, and that meets with divinity in this sacred space where everybody's thinking alike, and you can have and that is what makes for a very powerful Masonic meeting. The problem is in this is sometimes we don't make the sacred space so well, but that doesn't matter so much, as long as we do. The better you do it, the better experience you're going to have. And we're always asking divinity to be there, and hopefully we're doing that well. But the humans are the ones that screw this up, because the humans will sit there. The Freemasons, I have suffered through many a meetings where they're sitting there arguing over, are we going to have green beans or pinto beans, or they're arguing over, this charity golf tournament that we're trying to have, and some think it ought to be this way and some think it ought to be that way, and there they are getting mad at each other because they're all trying to get their own way, or somebody's trying to be the boss of the lodge, or somebody's mad at that guy on the other side of the room and he's being snarky to him. All of those things, and you can go on and on with that, are ego driven perspectives. But if we can lay that aside and just be there with our essence, with ourselves, in harmony with our brothers, then it opens you up to a different kind of lodge experience than most Masons have experienced before.
Is the creation of a sacred space worth the, or how do I put this correctly? Does the creation of a sacred space necessitate, I can speak, necessitate the sacrifice? What sacrifices are necessary on an individual level for that creation of a sacred space?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cameron. So sacrifice is, I'm gonna try and be careful answering this. Sacrifice is a great part of initiatic work. Initiatic work being a broad term that we use in all the Western mystery traditions, including Freemasonry, where we're trying to improve ourselves in our essence and transform ourselves into better people. So on an individual level, you're sacrificing that ego. In a lodge setting, in a group setting, if you could just set aside your ego and your want for doing things my way and getting my way, then that's the sacrifice that you have to make for just a little while. It is very difficult. It is a life's work to do this on an individual level. But my experience is that in a group level, you can set it aside for a little while if that becomes your lodge culture. Let me give you another kind of a sister example here. You can have a crappy day and go to lodge, and you can choose to be happy for a little while. Now, if you are unhappy in your life, then you can't, it's unfair to just say, hey, quit being, grumpy or not liking yourself or hating on yourself or feeling like the world's against you, and just be happy all the time. It doesn't really work that's a longer journey. That's a marathon that you're going to run. But you can go to lodge one night having had a bad day and say, okay, for the next hour and a half, I'm going to set aside all my worries, and I'm just going to be here with my brothers. You can temporarily do that. You can do the same thing with your ego. You can really want to get the golf tournament held at your country club and not the other guy's country club. But you can set that ego aside and not be pissed off about it if you don't get your way for a little while, right? Now, you may harbor some resentment, deep down inside, but really you just got to let those things go. Maybe the guy, across the way challenges you about, how you did the lecture last time, whatever. He's busting on you about something. You can set that aside and choose to sacrifice that ego for a little bit pretty easily. And when you do that, then nobody's coming at it from their angle. You're coming at it from y'all's angle, as we would say down south here.
What about sacrifice in terms of family work? I think he was from the South, actually, Hunter S. Thompson, who I'm fond of. He had that great quote that has probably been overused in a lot of ways, but I'm fond of it, right? It's for every, and I'm paraphrasing, for every moment of true beauty, 1,000 souls must be trampled. And the basic premise of that was that there is to create anything beautiful, whether it's a beautiful song, a great piece of art, a mixed martial arts, whenever anybody is able to master anything and create anything of true beauty, there is a significant amount of suffering that will precede that. And not just on the part of the person creating the thing, but there can be a lot of collateral damage in the way, the behind the music point of view. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Yesterday.
No.
It's one of those movies. It's an interesting, I think at the end of the day, it doesn't answer its own question. It tries to have its cake and eat it too. But the basic premise of the movie is, because I love the Beatles, guy gets hit by a bus and he wakes up in a world where the Beatles never existed. He remembers them, but nobody else does. So he starts, playing, because he's a musician, he starts playing all these Beatles songs and everybody thinks they're his, and they all, he becomes famous from them. And then he ends up tracking down, in this world, John Lennon, who ended up being like a painter, living in a cottage somewhere. Like he never, and he lives to be whatever 70 something in the movie, right? Because he was never famous, so he never died early, any of that stuff, right? And the movie tries to have it both ways, in the sense that in this world they get to have the Beatles because this guy remembers their songs and plays them for the crowd, and you get to have John Lennon live a good, long, happy life. But I think there's a question under there, which is, is having a song like Imagine, is having a band like the Beatles worth the suffering that John Lennon experienced? Because even despite his life being cut short, he also suffered a lot to create those great things. And I just think Freemasonry, there's a question worth asking there too. To me, a great piece of ritual improves the world as much as an amazing song, as much as an amazing movie. It makes the world a better place. But in order to have that greatness, there is a sacrifice that's necessary. Sacrifice from family, sacrifice from whatever it may be. What about that question? Is how much sacrifice is necessary to create these really beautiful and amazing things that we see in Lodge? And can the price ever be too high?
Cameron, you not only ask good questions, but you ask really long, multi-part questions. So let me, you brought up a couple of different things that I think we ought to address there. So I'm also a Scottish Rite Mason. And so I'm pretty familiar with the Scottish Rite work. And there's a couple of prevailing themes that you touched on in your question. One is in the 32nd degree, near the end, there's a part that the minister of state does where he's talking about all the things that you were just asking about. We're taught a couple of things. One is that Masonry is work. So what I hear you saying and completely agree with is no great, profound thing was ever created just off the cuff. I'll just make it. It was a lot of work. Those people, whether it's a band, a song, great ritual, people pour their heart and soul into it, and they spend a lot of time practicing, and that's a lot of time away from family, and that's a lot of time that they could be doing other activities, and so they are sacrificing to make it good. So on one hand, it's unfair to ask guys to sacrifice as much time away from their family as me and some of the the guys that are doing this nearly full time, it seems like, are doing. But on the other hand, if you don't sacrifice at all, if you don't practice, then you turn out a product, a ritual, or a program that's no good. And what's the point of that? So the first thing the Scottish Rite teaches that I'm dredging up is that Masonry is work, and the other is balance, right? They're talking about the royal secret, which is learning to balance things in your life. So the amount of sacrifice that I'm able to give to Masonry is different than the amount you're able to give, which is different than the amount that Joe Mason down the street's willing to give. Some people are in a place where they can sacrifice more, some less. Some are willing to make more sacrifices than others. But if you want to have an impact on Masonry, you've got to sacrifice some, and you can. And it's all about finding the balance for what your vision is, versus how much work you're willing to do to get there. And the important part, Cameron, in your question is that you think about it. So many times I see guys that are just kind of swept up in the torrent of Freemasonry, and they're just doing the things, but they're not consciously deciding, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I'm not going to do that thing. I'm going to put more effort into this and less effort into that. They're just kind of going from one thing to the next. And all of the guys, and like me, have come to a point in their Masonic careers where they said, okay, I'm doing everything. I'm spending my entire life in Masonry. I've got to cut some Masonic stuff out, and they culled off some stuff. They chipped off some stuff and some superfluous stuff so that they would be able to give more time and effort to the things that were important, because they were trying to make some things great, not do all things mediocre. I don't know if that's an answer, but
Yeah, no, it's a good answer. I guess the question is, and I've touched on this with other podcasts, is should Masonry be should the focus of Freemasonry, or should Freemasonry be an enjoyable experience or a fulfilling experience or even a sacrificial experience, right? In the sense that I'm a very lazy human being, so I don't particularly enjoy exercise. I'm not particularly fond of it at all. But for lack of a better term, I find it a fulfilling experience, or at least, a sacrificial experience in the best sense of the word, right? I'm sacrificing enjoyment in the moment because I recognize that there's a value to the activity. I think the thing I've heard a lot over the years, I've been a Mason 13 years, so not a long time, but not a short time either, I suppose, and is, guys come to Freemasonry, for a desire for companionship, for fun, for enjoyment, which there's nothing wrong with, but they're not necessarily recognizing, the why should they sit in their 500th degree if they've seen 499 degrees? They're thinking I could have more fun and more enjoyment sitting on the couch watching TV or being with my family. And it's like, that's true for you. You may have more enjoyment being at home this night, but the candidate, it will mean a lot to the candidate if they see a full house, if they see you there and sacrificing your time to be there. And at that point, it's not about you, it's about the candidate's experience, right? And I think even the way Freemasonry is being promoted, I've seen a few advertisements for it over the years. I think Australia had one, but it's all like, I get to meet guys for a beer, I get to meet my friends. And it seems that there's such an emphasis now. David Goggins, Jocko Willink, there's even a book written recently called The Crisis of Comfort. Such an emphasis now on, men actually seeking out challenge and actually seeking out work and fulfilling in sacrifice is something that seems to be at least talked about more and more on the online space. To the extent that it's just talked about versus acted upon is a question that, bears asking. But I guess, yeah, that's my question, is where does the enjoyment stop and the sacrifice start? And maybe we're a bit too, we've emphasized too much the enjoyment and not enough of the sacrifice.
Cameron, that's a great question. I love your cat behind you. It's about to get in the cabinet. What's the cat's name?
Cat's name is Bandit.
Awesome.
She's been on a couple episodes of this podcast. She's trying to get up there now.
That's classic. Hey, I love Jocko, and I love what you're saying here. I can only relate my experience. There is nothing that demoralizes me more than to go to practice for something where everybody's really not pulling their weight, and then during the practice that it's going to be not the best experience that it could be, and then you go to the lodge meeting, to the degree, whatever, and everybody isn't all prepared and everybody isn't synced up just right. And, the candidate, it is important to be there for that candidate, but that candidate didn't get the experience that they deserve. But there is nothing more fulfilling than to go to a practice where you know that everybody's going to do their part, everybody's going to know their words, everybody's sacrificing the time to be there, and that is going to be an awesome degree, and you can't wait to go. We are so lucky in North Carolina that we've been allowed to create things like the Traditional Observance Lodge. That experience is not for everybody, but for me, at our lodge at Sophia, every meeting and every degree is a fabulous experience. And it's fabulous because we put the time and effort into, practicing and planning to make it a great experience. And there's a ton of guys out there that just completely befuddle me that are perfectly happy to go to, their hometown lodge on a random Tuesday night and, have bad food and do a bad opening and closing and have no program and argue about the bills. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have the right to do that. There's a place for that in Masonry, I guess. I just have no desire to do it. And so they're not sacrificing very much and they're getting a poor product at the end, but it becomes magical when you really pour lots of time and energy into something and you come away from that experience, that lodge meeting, that degree, saying, man, that was awesome. You can just feel the energy in the room. I'm so proud of us. I'm so happy for our candidate that he got that experience, knowing what, he could have gotten if he went to, a lodge that wasn't doing that level of work. So I think it's a small population of people that feel like I do, but boy, is that a switched on crew, and it makes Masonry worth it for me to do it that way.
You mentioned bad food. I've never been to North Carolina, but I have been to different towns in the South. I would be surprised if the food was bad, because every time I've been anywhere in Southern United States, the food has been absolutely amazing. I don't know if any part of the world, not that I've traveled extensively, but of all of the types of cuisine I've tried, Southern USA has to be by far the best. So even your version of bad food in North Carolina probably would be delicious to a kid from Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. We're pretty lucky. I know I visit a ton of lodges. So I know the ones that have the really good cooks. Usually they have their wives involved, and or some, some lady or something cooking, reminds you of your grandma. Yeah, we have good food usually, but I've been to lodges where they do, sandwiches, or they'll order some pizzas, or whatever. And it's not bad. It's all good.
Well, I've actually got grits in my cupboard over there. A friend of I'm Mason, a guy called Dewan Hanna. When he was in the States, brought them for me. Grits is by far my favorite food for breakfast. It's the best. So I'm guessing you guys have a lot of those. Maybe not at Lodge, but in North Carolina, I'm sure there's a lot of that stuff floating around.
Yeah. Yeah. I cook a lot of grits. Yeah. After the podcast, hang around. I'll tell you the secret to how to make fabulous grits.
Well, you should say it on the podcast. Don't deny us Canadians, because we're trying to find grits in Canada is a very challenging experience. They're around sometimes if you're lucky. We had a southern restaurant in Windsor for like 5 minutes, like 10 years ago, and they served grits, and I think I was there every day for them. But yeah, grits, I mean, the barbecue, the food. North Carolina, I'm sure, has some great food as well. Are you guys, speaking of North Carolina, unfortunately in Ontario, Freemasonry is still primarily meeting in a virtual space. Our in-person meetings are suspended until September 1st. We are doing things online. But how are things going in North Carolina? I believe most states have meetings happening once again.
Yeah. So for the last several months, we've been allowed to go, but we could only meet at, I think it was 1/3 capacity. You have to sign a form saying if you have any symptoms, check your temperature, wear a mask. But slowly they've progressively started loosening those restrictions. And just last week they came out with we can pretty much meet any old way without mask. We just still have to do the form saying if you have any symptoms or not. But other than that, we're pretty much open for business.
You guys meet during.
I'm sorry, Cameron. Our grandmasters, this spans two, have followed the governor's guidelines. Is essentially what they've done.
Do you guys meet over the summer, or do you take the summer off?
It's not prescribed, but most lodges have in their bylaws that they have the option to go dark for some period in the summer. My lodge will usually take July off.
Okay. Well, I very much appreciate you mentioning at the start, that I could swing by North Carolina and crash with you, and I will take you up on that at some point, because I would love to visit with Masonic brethren and just in general visit North Carolina, because I've been lucky enough to meet a few brethren through this podcast and in general from, I think, both Carolinas. But it seems everybody's been super friendly, and it seems like a great place to visit. And I'm sure that, anybody watching this, if you find yourself in North Carolina, check out Freemasonry there, because I'm sure I'm sure it's a terrific jurisdiction. Check out you are with Wilkerson College Lodge and the traditional Observance Lodge, Sophia Lodge number 767. Those have websites that people can check out.
I know they both have a Facebook presence. I'm not sure how up to date their websites may or may not be.
Well, make sure to check them out if you can, and Freemasonry North Carolina in general. One more time, I'll remind everybody that if you've enjoyed listening to Worship Brother Wallace, he will be presenting on June 12th at Esotericon, and the link to pick up tickets is in the description to this video. I'll also throw your bio in the description. That was on the Esotericon website. I think everybody prefers to do these things in person, but it's understandable why they're going virtual. And like I said, there's a downside, but there's an upside. It's certainly very convenient. You don't need to wear pants. What more could you want? So right. I would strongly recommend people purchase tickets. And one more time, just mention the book you're co-authoring again, because I would recommend brethren keep an eye out for that.
Yep, it's called A Path to Providence, co-written with Most Worshipful Brother Sean Bradshaw, the immediate past Grandmaster here in North Carolina. It's going to be with Laudable Pursuit, which is Jason Marshall's publishing house. So, and you'll be able to find it on Amazon. I'm sure there'll be a whirlwind book signing tour when we finally get this thing hard copies.
And a project that I have just started through Square and Compass. If you look on the bottom of your screen, my email will pop up. Just look down. I am the secretary for Harmony Lodge 579 in Windsor, Ontario. And one of my favorite things to do when I travel is to exchange information with secretaries of any lodges I'm visiting and start a summons exchange. It's a bit like having a pen pal wherever it is. So I'm hoping to start a summons exchange, or I think in some states it's called a trestle board or summons exchange with all 50 states, to have at least one summons coming in from all 50 states and all the provinces here in Canada. So with that, if you're watching this and you want to learn about Masonry in Windsor, shoot me off an email and we can exchange summonses with your lodge. And Brother Wallace, if you would be so kind as to talk to your secretaries, I'd love to start exchanging summons with some North Carolina lodges. It's not a state I have yet, so I'd love to have it.
Right on, yeah.
And with that, like, comment, subscribe. I got a Patreon page, all that good stuff with this podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And you mentioned Ryan Flynn. He's actually another interview I got today. Another guy from Esotericon. So hopefully I'll get through all of you guys before the event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cameron, for the opportunity. Hey, ask Ryan Flynn about his time in Florence, Italy. He'll tell you.
Florence, Italy.